Good morning, everyone. I am very pleased to welcome you in my double vest today of president of the hosting club. This is Tennis Milano Alberto Bonacosta. It's the most ancient with the Genova tennis club in Italy. It's one of the founders, the 8 founders of the World Club of Centenaire, so the clubs which have more than 100 years. And it's the house of Italian tennis. We have played here several matches of Davis Cup and Fed Cup, and we like to think about our tennis club not only as the house of tennis, but as the house of sports in general. My double vest, I am also in the executive committee of CONI Lombardia, which is hosting Milano Cortina Games, as you all know, are involved in. And so it's a particular pleasure when I met the U.S. Center for SafeSport, Hilary, and all her team. We were extremely pleased to host here this event, which is an event extremely important since the topic that you were going to face today, it's extremely important. And for sure, U.S. Center for SafeSport are ages forward. Italy, for sure. I don't know the other countries, but it is extremely important to share the values of SafeSport, and for sure they are a big example, and the panel of today, it's an extremely qualified panel, which for sure will be very helpful in sharing the values. Values that are particularly significant in this week because we are playing the Olympic Winter Games, and what is very important for Italian CONI and for all players of sport is that when sport has an educational aim, as it should have, as it for sure has in this club in which we have 700 children and athletes which train each day, it is very important that the values of SafeSport are not only in honor codes and only written down, but become a part of the culture of a country. And I think that U.S. Center for SafeSport can teach us very much. When I met them, it was really very important because they are really significantly forward many ordinaments in having really understood these principles. So you have a very full morning. We have very important panelists and speakers, and I now introduce you your moderator, LA 84 Olympic gold medal, Benita Fitzgerald Mosley, which will do her introductory speech. I wish you a very productive morning of work.
Buongiorno. Good morning and welcome to everyone here. Just so happy to have you for our United Globally for Athlete Safety Symposium. Grazie mille to Elena and Martina. They're in the back of the room. We just met Elena. Thank you to both of you and to everyone here at the Tennis Club Milano Alberto Bonacosta for opening your doors to all of us and donating the use of your beautiful space for this important occasion. Thank you also to our generous sponsor, Clue. They're the leading investigation and intelligence management software. They're trusted by professionals all over the world to prevent, detect, and respond to threats effectively. Most importantly, I just want to thank all of you. It's a busy time here in Milan. You're running around to different events and meetings and hopefully enjoying a lot of sport here at the Milan Cortina Olympic Games. And you're taking time out of your busy schedules to prioritize athlete safety in the Olympic ecosystem. I'm really humbled to stand in front of a crowd of this caliber. You're pretty amazing. This is the 9th Olympic Games that I've been affiliated with, either as an athlete, of course winning gold in '84, but on the team in '80, alternating in '88. I've served with USA Track and Field and the US Olympic Paralympic Committee. So, never ceases to amaze me how amazing it is to get so many people together, surrounded by friends and colleagues from all over the world. I'm always inspired and motivated. Today, we have individuals from over 30 countries and 5 continents gathered with us for this symposium. And we have representatives from national and international sport federations, national Olympic committees, our own United States Olympic and Paralympic Committee, our national governing bodies in the United States, and the U.S. Department of State Sports Diplomacy Office, and the U.S. Counsel in Milan. I also have one very special guest here with me today, my husband Ron Mosley in the back there. First full day here in Milan, so if he falls asleep back there on the sofa, don't mind him. All of us are here today because we share a common belief that we are better together. We recognize that sports unite people from all walks of life, and that sense of camaraderie and togetherness builds all of us in a fundamental human way. We can also agree that athletes are really the most important component of the Olympic movement, and by ensuring that every athlete from every country has their basic need for safety taken care of and met, sports can truly transform individuals and teams and organizations and regions and nations and even the world. I began as CEO of the U.S. Center for Safe Sport just 11 short days ago. And I accepted this role because it's more than a job for me, it's really a calling. It's a calling to bring together my experience as an Olympic athlete together with the skills I've accumulated in business over the last couple of decades, and to lead this pioneering organization, the U.S. Center for Safe Sport, that's been around in some ways 9 years seems like a long time, and maybe others it seems like a very, very short while, but they're really a pioneer in this space, and I've got to know the team and really all of the contributions that have been made by this organization over the last 9 years, and it's pretty significant. In fact, we currently have more than 2,500 individuals listed on our public database who have had their access restricted to protect the sport community in the United States. And we want to share what we've learned during these 9 years, including some of the challenges that we've met. We also want to learn from you about the practices and strategies that are working to protect your athletes in your countries and regions, which is why I am going to be moderating a panel of international experts a little bit later this morning. But most importantly, we want to discuss ways to collaborate across our country's borders, and we want to ensure that every athlete at every level, from the practice fields to the Olympic podium, feels safe, supported, and strengthened through the power of sport. This collaboration is especially critical for the U.S. Center for Safe Sport, as the LA 28 Olympic Games will be on our home soil in just 2 short years. Thank you all for your participation today. I'm looking forward to meeting all of you during the break. And now I want to recognize and thank April Holmes. She's our Safe Sport Board Chair Emeritus, also a Paralympic gold medalist in her own right, and also the executive leadership team of the U.S. Center for Safe Sport. So come on up.
Good morning, everyone. We're here to present a brief overview of the U.S. Center for Safe Sport. And I want to just give a little background on our organization. So we came about as a response to a need. In response to high-profile cases of abuse in USA Gymnastics and other sports, the public demanded action. Athletes demanded action, and Congress demanded action, which resulted in 2 authorizing statutes that allow the U.S. Center for Safe Sport to investigate and adjudicate cases of sexual, emotional, and physical misconduct. It also gives us the ability to restrict and ban individuals from sport when we have warrant to believe they are a danger to the sport community. This panel is meant to showcase our core pillars and how they work to advance athlete safety within the U.S. Olympic and Paralympic movement. And as our CEO just mentioned, we're approaching our 9th year of service to athletes in the U.S., and we hope to share some of those lessons with you today, and that's what this panel is meant to do. We'll have a brief opportunity at the end of the panel to take questions, and we ask that just in the interest of time, because we do have so much content, that we keep those questions sort of focused on the topics here, the SafeSport process. And there'll be an opportunity later in the morning to address broader big picture questions with the international panel, which will be moderated by Benita. So without further ado, I'd love to introduce my colleagues. First, I'm going to skip over this colleague for just 1 second because we put her last for a special reason, and I'll tell you why at the end. We have Monica Rivera, our Vice President of Education and Research. She brings 20 years of experience in abuse prevention, including with U.S. and international organizations, where she spent much of her time working directly with survivors. She's a TEDx speaker, a chapter co-author on 2 books, a faculty member, and a regular content contributor. She's also a survivor, and she brings that lived experience to every aspect of her work. Growing up, she was a competitive cheerleader and gymnast and swimmer. Next, we have Jessica Perril. She's our General Counsel and Vice President of Response and Resolution. She brings 19 years of legal experience, including as an attorney with the Colorado State Attorney General's Office. She began her career litigating cases involving child abuse, mistreatment, and maltreatment of at-risk adults. Since joining the U.S. Center for SafeSport, she's led significant progress through a series of process changes within the Response and Resolution Department, our investigative arm, to increase efficiencies, improve consistency, and ensure trauma-informed practices are applied throughout. Jessica grew up playing competitive soccer and now enjoys watching her children play competitive sports, running them to many practices. Hannah Hinton. She's our Vice President of Organizational Development and Compliance. She's a lawyer, and she's legally trained in compliance with 15 years of professional experience building audit and compliance frameworks. She's been with the center 7 years. She oversees both the audit and compliance functions for over 52 national governing bodies within the U.S. Olympic movement. She believes that the goal of audits is not just passing them, it's creating a safe environment where athletes can thrive. She's a former D1 collegiate tennis player who now channels that competitive energy into solo international travel and spoiling her rescue pup, Ruby. So it's hard to announce people after you announce a gold medalist. So that's why I save April Holmes till the last. So April Holmes is our board chair emeritus. She served as interim CEO prior to Benita taking the helm. She is our first athlete board chair. She's a 4-time Paralympian, a bronze medalist, a gold medalist, a world record holder, a motivational speaker, author, executive coach, and she's an advocate for not only athlete safety, but increased awareness and recognition around people with disabilities. So with that, I'm going to hand the microphone to Monica. I'll point you to the handout on your seat that gives you the core pillars of the U.S. Center for SafeSport, and that really helps articulate each of the speakers' content. So Monica, I'm sorry, April goes first. Now April goes first. I got in the habit of putting April last. April's going to go first and hand it off to Monica. Here you go, April.
Thank you, Hilary. I've had some very interesting experiences in my life and some very interesting opportunities. As a young athlete running around playing sport, I dreamed of excellence. I dreamed of gold medals. I dreamed of being the best in the world. And that was my athletic dreams. And I think about how often kids nowadays are running around basketball courts or tennis courts or any athletic field, and they're dreaming the same dream of being the greatest, of being the best, of winning championships, of winning medals. And so I want you to take a second and think about the kids. Let's think about over 9,000 young people, athletes, who have reached out to us, the U.S. Center for SafeSport. Just last year, over 9,000 athletes have reached out to us and have shared with us their stories of how someone, somewhere, during their moment of dreaming, has taken away that dream for them, has ruined that dream for them due to sexual misconduct, emotional misconduct, physical misconduct that has to do with sport. That kid didn't sign up for that. The athlete didn't sign up for that. And so we in this room were entrusted. Parents are trusting us. NGBs are trusting us. NOCs are trusting us. They're trusting us with the dreams of these athletes. And that is why we're here today, because of the athletes. We're here to make a difference in the lives of the athletes. When my mother turned me over to my track coach, my basketball coach, other parents, chaperones, it was because she trusted them enough. And so the question is, who are we trusting? Can we come together as a nation? Can we come together, entire world, the universe? Can we come together, band together, put together a blueprint that we will use to move forward from today on? We can no longer say language is a barrier for us because we're all in this room. We can no longer say the economics is a barrier for us. We can never use political as a barrier for us. Instead, there is no barrier to being able to protect athletes. Again, I was that athlete. I rose to that level, and I've not experienced in sport those instances of sexual, emotional, or physical misconduct. But I've seen them. And during my time as an athlete, SafeSport did not exist, but it does today. And because we know better, we have to do better. Because we know better, we have to do better. I'm going to say it one more time because my coach used to always tell me, you say things 3 times for emphasis. Mm-hmm. Because we know better, we now must do better. Pick up the phone, send an email, send a chat, shake someone's hand, but pledge from this day forward to do better. Because doing better is how we move the nation forward, how we move the world forward, how we move athletes forward. Because without athletes, none of us are here today. So with that, I'm going to pass the microphone. I'm not going to take up a whole lot of time, but we'll come back.
Good morning, buongiorno. Thank you so much for being here. My name's Monica Rivera. I have the honor of speaking to you today for 90 minutes. Just kidding, I wish. I don't have 90, that's every educator's dream. I don't have 90 minutes, but I am going to give a little bit of an overview of education and research at the U.S. Center for SafeSport. Now, as Hilary mentioned, we take an intentional 3-pronged approach at the center that includes individual accountability, response and resolution. Jessica will speak to that. Organizational accountability, making sure that policies and practices are actually being implemented on the ground. And then I get to the honor of running the teams that do education and research, which is really the through line through each of those. The prevention, education, and research team it spends most of our time trying to figure out how do we get folks to learn this stuff? How do we get people to take such big concepts and apply them on the ground in their own lived realities? You know, education sounds simple, and oftentimes whenever organizations are facing safeguarding challenges, they reach for more training. And as the Vice President of Education, I'm not going to tell you that education's not the answer, but I think that we need to actually nuance more. What do we mean when we're talking about education? Because there's a difference between providing information to people and actually inspiring behavior change for the long haul. So at the U.S. Center for SafeSport, we are working on changing the narrative, shifting the narrative from awareness to, real-world application that people feel inspired and hopeful and like they feel invested in safeguarding. For example, we created a guidebook or a guide online for parents who are going to be watching the Olympic Games with their kids as a way for them to watch what's happening on screen and in a very low pressure opportunity, point out moments of teamwork, point out dynamics between coaches and athletes, and then ask their kids, how does that apply to your experience in sport? What does your coach do if you make a mistake? So again, we're taking these large concepts and trying to bring them into the living rooms and the dining room tables across our ecosystem. Now, as a survivor, I obviously know firsthand that when we're talking about abuse, we're talking about very real material consequences that impact people forever. And so education is about fighting against that abuse. But as an educator and as a parent, I know we need to know more than just what we're fighting against. We need to know what we're fighting for. And so at the U.S. Center for Safe Sport, we're fighting for cultures that allow all athletes to thrive and that keep, again, the entire ecosystem connected and safe. I want to take a quick second and unpack what do we mean when we say abuse. Now, one of your handouts there has a little image at the bottom that looks like little pebbles. One of the common misconceptions that I hear when I'm out doing education is this idea that abuse is a single act of violence. But what gets missed in that is a lot of behaviors that lead up to that violence and then behaviors afterwards that maintain silence. So when we're trying to educate about how to stop abuse, we have to be able to look at that entire spectrum. So one example in the after abuse section is called post-abuse maintenance. So sometimes we'll hear from administrators frustration about, parents are calling and, expressing concern about playing time. Now, on the surface, playing time might not seem like a safeguarding issue, but we know that sometimes abusers will manipulate playing time to keep survivors silent. So if we just dismiss that as not being about safeguarding, we're going to miss an opportunity to intervene. So at SafeSport, we're trying to pull back the lens and look at the whole spectrum of abuse. So on that panel, on that handout, you'll see the blue indicates those individual acts of violence, and then the other pebbles are the ones that lead up to that are sometimes seemingly innocent. They might not even violate a policy necessarily when taken individually, but they create an environment where abuse can thrive. Now, we need to take this broader approach, not only because it's more effective, but I believe it's actually more inspiring for change. Because if we're only focusing on those individual instances of abuse and the people who cause them, anyone who knows I would never hurt an athlete might not feel invested in safeguarding. If they know they're not going to hurt an athlete, what do they need to do? But simply not abusing an athlete is not enough. That's not how we end abuse in sport. We're all responsible for the environment around us and whether those communities either support or prevent abuse. I want to give a quick example of that. Sometimes we'll hear from coaches, they'll say, I know that I would never harm a kid, so why can't I give them a ride home after practice? And it's a very well-intentioned question. But the truth is that anytime an adult is one-on-one with a minor athlete, even if they would never harm that athlete, they're creating an environment where that's normal. And that puts pressure on children who are not developmentally prepared to try to discern what is a safe ride home and what is not a safe ride home. So by expanding our scope and asking people to actually look at not just stopping the bad guys, but creating an environment where it's almost impossible for them to harm a kid, we all can feel empowered and invested in safeguarding. I think the next challenge is for us to move beyond simply caring about abuse. It's good, abuse prevention. It's important that we all care about it, but we need to actually take that care into action. A coach couldn't read an informational packet about how to coach a skier and expect to then coach someone through the Olympics. It takes every day practicing, just like every other, drill or muscle memory, to really be implementing these things. We compare it sometimes to fire prevention. When you think about fire prevention, we don't just teach people how to spot fires. We actually teach them how to tend to the environment around them to minimize the risk of fires. We do regular drills to make sure that we can spot any gaps in safety and to make sure people are prepared for what to do in moments of crisis. So at SafeSport, we're taking the same approach. We have a three-pronged approach that intentionally blends accountability, both on the individual and organizational level, with education to make sure that people in the sports ecosystem feel empowered to intervene, feel empowered to take responsibility for their role in safeguarding, and feel empowered to build safe sport cultures where all athletes can thrive. And with that, I will turn it over to my colleague, Jessica, who's going to speak to our individual accountability or response and resolution.
Thanks, Monica. Oh, is this on?
It is. Doesn't sound like it.
Okay. Thanks. Thank you, everyone. It's an honor to be here. I, as has been mentioned, I'm General Counsel at the Center and lead our response and resolution team. As Hilary mentioned in the beginning, we are very fortunate in the United States to have a statute. Our U.S. Congress thought these issues important enough to put a statute in place that gives us specific authority in the response and resolution context to take reports, investigate allegations of abuse, and adjudicate them, and eventually sanction individuals who are found to have abused individuals within the Olympics movement. So that's what my team does. This really was sort of a first of its kind. There wasn't a playbook, right? And so when the center was started in 2017, I don't think anybody probably could have imagined that we would end up where we are today. Our first year in operation, we had a couple hundred reports over the entire year. And as has already been mentioned, last year we received just over 9,000 reports. And just to give some context, so far for 2026, we had our biggest month yet to date at the center and had just over 1,000 reports just in the month of January. So all of that ultimately is good news, right? Which seems strange to say, but people are feeling comfortable coming forward and reporting allegations of misconduct in sport to our team. But with that comes a lot of work, right? And so that's what my team has been working through really since 2017. As I said, there was no playbook. So we've tried within the response and resolution team to kind of draw from similar systems, right? The criminal justice system, the Title IX system, which is within the university setting within the United States, but there isn't an exact system that we could essentially copy. So there's been a learning curve, to say the least, I think, over the time that we've been in existence. I think we've come a long way, as Nita mentioned, in the last few years, but there's certainly additional work to be done. And that's one of the reasons why we're so grateful to be here and have you all in this room so that we can learn from each other and have these conversations about best practices and how we have been doing things in the U.S., things we've been doing well, things we have not done well, and what you all are seeing in your various countries. So thank you again for being here. I'm going to briefly just kind of go through our process. There is also on that same document that Monica mentioned, kind of a general overview of the response and resolution process in the United States. We do have the ability to take reports over the phone. We have a group of trained individuals who take in those reports. We have an online reporting portal through our website, and we can take reports through email. So as you can imagine, as I said, we had just over 9,000 reports last year. We have a team who's processing all of those and figuring out whether or not it's a case that we have jurisdiction over. As you will see next, we have to assess our cases to determine whether or not we have jurisdiction. We only have jurisdiction over individuals who are part of the U.S. Olympic and Paralympic movement, right? And so that's a very specific group. We don't necessarily have jurisdiction over someone who operates within the U.S., within the university system. We may or may not have jurisdiction over someone who is in any of the countries of you all here in this room. Sometimes there's overlap, sometimes there's not. So we have to be assessing those and figuring out whether or not it's a case that we can actually take. Our mandate by our U.S. Congress really, although we have jurisdiction over emotional and physical abuse cases as well, really wanted us to focus on allegations of sexual misconduct. So we're always going to take a case if it involves any sort of sexual misconduct. If it involves emotional or physical abuse, more likely than not, we are going to be sending that back to the individual national governing bodies to handle. That's for a lot of reasons, but for the most part, particularly if it predates the center, those cases are often better for the national governing body to resolve. After we've assessed for jurisdiction, we have a team who sort of does initial inquiry into our cases. We also have an investigation team that does a full investigation, right? Anything you could imagine that an investigation might do, collecting documentary evidence, collecting physical evidence if we have it, conducting interviews. So our investigation team runs through that. And then we also have a legal team that has grown very significantly over the last few years that handles sort of the due process, procedural due process part of the response and resolution team. So one of the things that's clearly laid out in our statute is that we have to provide procedural due process to folks who are running through response and resolution. So there are a handful of things that come with that, but the legal team is really working along the way to ensure that happens. And at the end of the day, if we find that somebody has committed misconduct, they have the right to ask for arbitration. And we contract with some arbitration bodies who conduct those. And ultimately, those arbitrators can decide to uphold whatever our sanction may be. They can decide to overturn it, or they can decide to modify it in some way. So that's sort of a general overview of our process. One of the benefits, I'd say, of our process is that we have a fairly low burden of proof. It's preponderance of the evidence for any of the lawyers in the room. So unlike the criminal justice system in the United States that has to prove things beyond a reasonable doubt, we don't have to do that. So often there will be a criminal report made at the same time that we receive a report, and the criminal case may or may not go anywhere, but we can still proceed with our case, which we have heard from survivors that is at times their sort of only opportunity to have their voice heard, which I think is a benefit of our process. As has already been mentioned, I would say one of the key highlights of our individual accountability is our centralized disciplinary database. So this is another thing that is specifically highlighted in our statute, that Congress says we can have a publicly available database that lists individuals that we have barred from sport. And that is the database that has already been referenced that has currently over, on any given day, usually around 2,500 or more individuals named on that database. And I would just encourage all of you in this room to spread the word. It is on our website. You can enter in a name and see if there's a match, essentially. And it's, I'd say, one of the resources that we would like to be used more than it is, because it doesn't really matter whether or not you come from a space that we don't have jurisdiction over, right? If you come from the university space, or if you come from another country, you can still check that database to make sure that that individual hasn't moved into whatever space you operate in. Again, I'm really grateful for opportunities like this to collaborate in the international space. One, to highlight the centralized disciplinary database, but also to learn from you all. We have had, I think, with some of you in this room, specific cases where, whether it's an athlete or a coach, or a trainer, has been in the United States, has been a part of the U.S. Olympic and Paralympic movement, and moved to another country. And we've had cases where, we've had a case, we've investigated, adjudicated, and that person has gone to one of your countries in this room. And we've been able to, through relationships that are created in venues like this, we've been able to collaborate. We've been able to have conversations about how to make sure we're keeping athletes safe in the United States, and how you can also keep your athletes safe in your various countries. So we want to continue that. Again, I hope to meet more of you than I have met already today, so that when these issues do come up and we do have a case, I know who to call and say, hey, can we have a conversation about this? So I really appreciate that. I'm happy to answer any questions at the coffee break about what our process looks like. And I'm going to pass it off to my colleague, Hannah.
Hi, good morning. Thank you all for being here to discuss such an important topic. So organizational development and compliance, the third pillar. What is it? What does it mean? So essentially, what my team does is take the work that you heard from Monica and Jessica, and we try to make that into practical application for the U.S. Olympic and Paralympic national governing bodies in the U.S., so that it's not just safeguarding work on paper, but it's actually brought into implementation in practice. So the primary way that we do that is through prevention-based compliance audits. We do this to 52 national governing bodies that exist currently in the U.S. It's changing, fluctuating. We're going to be adding a new one. And we do those annually. Now, these audits don't take place in a boardroom or a conference room. They take place out in the field, where competition is happening, where athletes are training. And we do this to ensure that those policies are actually, as Monica mentioned, being effectuated and understood by the folks who have to implement them. So on the handout, again, I'm going to kind of talk high level about each of those areas of our audit. So happy to chat later, because I know it's going to be very high level. So the first area that we look at is one of our core foundational policies here at the center called the MAP, Minor Athlete Abuse Prevention Policies. These policies restrict the interactions between adults and minors as it relates to sport in various areas, such as in locker rooms, training sessions, as well as electronic media and communications as well. So we actually go out in the field and make sure this is happening. Okay? The next area that we look at, to Monica's side, is training. Are the coaches, folks who are having regular contact or any authority over minors, sometimes it's umpires, officials, leadership positions, are they getting training, and are they getting training regularly? We test all of that. The next area that we look at, to Jessica's side, she's mentioned the centralized disciplinary database. We ban or suspend individuals. We make sure that the national governing bodies have participation mechanisms in place to make sure those individuals are actually kept out of sport and not just showing up and competing or coaching in various ways. The other area that we look at is reporting. Very critical. Do people know how to report, where to report? Do they feel safe to report? These are all things that we test in the field. One of the other areas that makes these compliance audits particularly unique is that we're not just talking to national governing body leadership or people running events. We talk to the parents, we talk to the coaches, we talk to the athletes to make sure that the policies that are impacting them are actually understood. Because when there are gaps, and each sport community is very unique and different and faces different challenges, we want to be able to come back to the national governing body to help close those gaps and implement changes. And for 52 sports, it could look very different. Okay? And our audits are moving from a tick box, which again is a start. I think every country, we need to start with policies in place. But then how do we move beyond that? Because for our national governing bodies, we really want to build prevention-focused systems that can be infused into the organizational DNA of our national governing bodies. And the way that that happens is with continuous monitoring, real accountability, and continuous improvement, ongoing, to really make this change happen. And finally, I will say that on the accountability side, this is not just for the elite Olympians and Paralympians that you all are here to see. It's also for the grassroots and pipeline that for those kids that hope to be here one day. And we want to make sure that those ecosystems are also protected by these policies as well. So I hope today that you see these three pillars cannot work in a silo. They cannot work in isolation. They have to work together to reinforce each other, to close gaps. And only when that happens can athlete safety and well-being truly change from a deep cultural level, and recognizing that it's everyone in here's responsibility to do that.